Okay, another common, fairly common source of bias is having a survey that has subjective wording or what are called loaded questions. So we're looking at non-objective wording in our questions on the survey, right? And these can be used to kind of drive responses in a certain direction. And so I'll give you a semi-real life example. Down in Brunswick, Georgia, Georgia Pacific makes paper, right? And a couple of lobbying groups did surveys of pretty much exactly the same population, people that lived nearby to the mill. And the first survey said, hey, did you know that Georgia Pacific releases 20 tons of poisonous gas into the air each and every year? And of course they would answer yes or no, and then the follow-up question would be, do you think pollution regulations should be made stricter? Okay, so we've got some emotional words here. We've got poisonous gas, we've got pollution, and so these have negative overtones, of course. And so poisonous gas, no, I didn't know that. So yeah, it sounds like pollution's a problem. We should make the regulations stricter. Okay, Survey B asked a similar question. Do you know that Georgia Pacific spent $100 million last year to voluntarily reduce its emissions? Do you think there need to be tighter restrictions on emissions? And so believe it or not, this is really asking the same questions from a different viewpoint, right? Emissions is kind of an innocuous word. It doesn't have negative overtones on it, undertones, I should say. And the fact that they've spent lots of money to voluntarily reduce these emissions makes them sound like, oh, they're doing good things. They care about the environment, blah, blah, blah. So no, they don't need more restrictions. Sounds like they're doing a good job, right? So these two questions are going to drive people in opposite directions as far as whether regulations need to be stricter or tighter, right? Based on the leading question and on the emotional wording or subjective wording in the questions. As a side note, that poisonous gas was carbon dioxide, which will kill you, but most people don't view that as, a poisonous gas, given that we give off carbon dioxide when we breathe, right? There's other things like self-interest studies. You've got to watch out for, like if a medical company is of course they're doing their own experiment, but let's say they're doing a survey on perceptions or something along those lines, they have a vested interest in the results of the survey coming out one way over another way, which is why usually companies will hire an outside firm to do their polls or surveys for them to avoid potential bias from self-interest. You've got response bias. So imagine I'm sitting in front of you and you're taking this class and I'm like, hey, what do you think of my teaching? And you're like, thinking internally, right? Is my response going to influence my grade? Right? And you don't want to say a bad thing to my face. If you don't like my teaching style, you probably don't want to say that to my face because you're worried it might impact your grade in some way. Of course it won't, but you can't be sure of that, right? And, or the guy with a mustache interviewing people. Hey, what do you think about mustaches? Women in particular try to be polite and not hurt people's feelings. And so, they're not going to come out to, most people aren't going to come out to their face and say, oh, I can't stand mustaches and that looks really bad on you. So you've got to watch out for what's called response bias. Our last two big ones are undercoverage and non-response. And these are very different. So undercoverage, it happens when you select the sample of people. Some portion of the population is not sampled at all, or has smaller representation in the sample than in the overall population. Okay, and this can happen on purpose or just by not thinking things carefully through. So for instance, if I am doing phone calls for my, to select people for my survey, and I only call people at their home number between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., I'm going to miss everybody who works outside the home during 10 and 2, which is a large segment of the population. And I'm going to miss students as well, right? So miss students and workers. Not all workers, like swing shift, well, they'll be asleep probably, right? Or overnight shift. But, so you can't just call it one set of times. You have to try back at different times. So here you're missing the people who work or at school. They're undercovered or underrepresented in the sample. Non-response, you've got people who were chosen for a survey that choose not to respond. And this is often confused with voluntary response sample. But remember, in a voluntary response sample, the researchers are not choosing specific people. They're just putting a blanket call out, and whoever answers, answers, right? Here, with non-response, the researchers are choosing certain people for the survey, and some people are just, trashing the survey, hitting delete, throwing it in the trash can, whatever. And so there, people who choose not to respond may be different than those who do. So, right, you hang up on a pollster who calls you, or you don't answer because you have caller ID, right? That would be non-response. You get a survey in the mail or in your email and you just hit delete, right? You just throw it in the trash. Those are non-response biases. Okay, so this is a good place to break, and we'll do the examples in a different video.